this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
This episode of Life Science Success is brought to you by 5280 Life Sciences Consulting. If you need help setting your strategy, meeting your operational goals, or you are selecting and implementing critical technology in your business, we should talk. Visit 5280lifescience.com to schedule a meeting and find out more.
So today I'd like to welcome to the podcast, Don Hawthorne. Welcome, Don.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Yeah, thanks so much. Could you just do me a favor and go through a little bit of your background just for the guests to get a bit of perspective in terms of everything that you've had your hands on?
Sure. Happy to do that. I joined the life science industry in 1983 in the Bay Area, working for Syntex, a pharma company that Roche ended up buying. And I was in both corporate and a device division there. Joined my first startup in 1985 and was CFO of three such companies, of biopharm, specialty pharma, and diagnostic companies in the Bay Area before I moved to the greater Boston area. Joined an equity fund for the first couple years, during which time I was COO of a biologics portfolio company. And then after leaving the firm, I was a COO of a healthcare IT services company. Was general manager of a life science tools company division, and then 5-time CEO after that in a variety of industry subsegments, biopharm, translational medicine, diagnostics, and so forth.
Wow, you've had, quite the career and especially quite the leadership career and in life sciences as well. Congratulations on that.
Thank you. I've had the chance to work in or with 45 companies over the years, if you count my consulting work. And as I like to tell people, that pretty much means I've seen everything, both good and bad.
Yeah, kind of to that point, I guess. So whenever you come into a new company, what is your process, or where do you start from?
Well, frequently I get messages from either CEOs or their investors. And they're typically asking for assistance in some element of go-to-market. And if we define what go-to-market is, it begins when you have a raw, unproven technology and an early stage hypothesis about a unmet market need. And the great companies like Abbott Diagnostics way back when, Genentech in recent decades, companies like that, they'll marry up marketing and technologists at that earliest stage. That's when go-to-market work starts. And there's a whole series of testing activities that continue. And then go-to-market ends when you either kill the project or you retire a product that has been on the market. So where I come in, it can be anywhere in that spectrum, although I've spent most of my career in what I'll call the pre-revenue to 50 to 100 million revenue size companies.
Okay. And so in terms of starting off evaluating maybe new technologies, tell me how that typically plays out.
So what we'll start early on with doing is asking questions about, let's describe the technology. What do we know about it? What do we know about what we think the hypothesis is about the market opportunity? And what follows pretty naturally from that is a form of assumptions mapping, where you look and you say, okay, what do we know? What do we believe? And more importantly, what do we believe is necessary to be true for this technology or this company to be successful? And then that gets you into that quadrant where you're looking at, okay, it matters, it's important, and we don't have enough evidence yet. And that's the testing idea. And so one of the critical things to do is to figure out how to proceed with testing a variety of sorts from the get-go. And that's not just true at the beginning when you've got that original scenario I described, but that remains true because we're always dealing with assumptions. And you and I have talked about this before, that value inflection points are really important concepts. And what we mean by that is there's upside opportunities to create new value. There's also downside opportunities to see existing value destroyed. And so it's this constant dialogue about how do we gather information that informs us about what's true so we can make sure we're creating new value and not allowing existing value to deteriorate.
So it is so important, and it's interesting because I've spent quite a bit of my career in product lifecycle management. So on the engineering side, and probably less on the go-to-market side. Obviously, there's great people oftentimes that are taking the technology forward and taking it to customers, but also in terms of developing a product, you also need to understand what the customer perceives or what they want as well in this journey, I would imagine. So from a market standpoint, what do you do in terms of looking at the customer's needs in terms of developing the products?
Sure. There's really two core concepts that matter. I'll label them product market fit and business model fit. And on the product market fit, what you're really looking for is, do we have a unique enough, compelling value proposition for our product? So that, as one person said once, if you describe it to a potential customer, they reach across the table, grab the collar of your shirt and say, you can't leave until you get me one of those. And that's a value proposition that actually resonates in the marketplace. So how do you figure that out? That's really the first part of what you're asking. And that's the product market fit angle. And there you begin to look at what jobs are the customers trying to get done. And you really, instead of looking at it as this feature or that benefit of the product, you begin to say, separate from any solution, what is the customer, the job executor trying to accomplish if they could do their job perfectly? And when you start to map out the job steps, and more importantly, you figure out what desired outcomes they want with each such job step, then suddenly you actually have clarity about, with those desired outcome statements, with what the true customer needs are. And where that's powerful is in many companies, they don't have clear understandings across the organization about what the unmet customer needs are. You surely can't get to a powerful value proposition without some form of common belief on that. So this is how the jobs to be done approach really lets you get your arms around what the customer really needs. And then what you do is, as you come up with those hypotheses out of those desired outcome statements, then you can start to run the experiments we were talking about a minute ago. And from there, get proof points that get you to a compelling value proposition or not. In which case, as Peter Thiel likes to say, competition is for losers. Kill the project if you can't come up with a compellingly differentiated value proposition. Because the final thought on the product market fit, if you don't have something, if the customer has a good enough alternative, they'll stick with it. And you're going to end up treading water before you drown. So don't do that. On the other side, and this is a really important insight that I find frequently companies think less about, is it's great to have product market fit, but do you place it in a company business model that is scalable and profitable? Because if you don't do that, then it's just a question of time before you get knocked down by the external marketplace. And so there you get into issues of not only who is your customer, how do you reach your customers, what are the channels, what kind of relationships do you form with the customers, and obviously then their value proposition. But you get into some of the other things about what are the key resources the company needs to have in hand, or the key activities they need to do, the key partners they need to work with. Those are the various viability concepts that allow you to figure out what makes sense. Is it feasible? So you're really getting at a lot of the feasibility concepts there. So the viability is the financial side. Can you make money at it, and can you do it at a profitable margin versus the costs? So that's the business model fit that's really important.
Yes, I've talked to quite a few companies in life sciences now that are relatively newer startups. Some of them have really clear visions of where they want to go. Some of them don't. And I can clearly say that the ones that do, it's a lot easier to more or less talk to them about venture capital companies that are looking for companies like them in the space. Other ones, you still are trying to figure out exactly how would you tell that story overall, just in terms of initial funding. I could only imagine now, if you look later on into the product lifecycle stage and trying to figure out how do you translate this now to the market. If it's not clear to you, how will it ever be clear to the market?
And part of the thing that's really striking, and I remember this experience when I was running companies, is we sat around, and I tend to be a little reactive in a playful way about things like MRDs and PRDs, market requirements documents and product requirement documents. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people sitting at desks in buildings of their company writing these documents in a Google Doc or a Word format and thinking, have you ever gotten outside the building and talked to customers? Because what you're basically doing is, and this is the important part, you're writing a story about your assumptions. And those assumptions are likely wrong for all of us when we're writing those things because they're first cut. Not necessarily every one of them, but enough of them that you don't know for sure that your business is going to work. And so if you take a more humble approach and say, look, we need to map those assumptions, like I said earlier, and get out of the building and go talk to people and run tangible experiments, not just for the sake of running experiments, but for learning purposes. So we can say, this is true, this is not true. Therefore, we can make adjustments or we can kill the project, whatever the answers might be. That's that value inflection point kind of mindset. It says, look, you're always on the margin. It's either up or down. What are you learning? How are you adjusting?
Yeah, and so in life sciences companies, I would imagine overall this sort of dance of sharing things with the customer, but also understanding you can't sell a regulated product until it's approved, and you also have market challenges that you don't want your competition to get too much of the information about what you're working on. How do you manage across that?
Let me talk about a client anecdote that may be helpful. This is a life science tools company that has a very special technology that has, to put it in layman's language, it has the performance levels of next-gen sequencing, but it can be done quickly and cheaply in any hospital lab in just a couple hours. And so what we began to do there is we say, okay, let's go out and talk to oncologists. Let's then go out and talk to pathologists and even some lab managers, and let's really begin to map their jobs and the desired outcomes they have for each of those job steps. And what you do is, and this is for a company that just raised its Series A money, so it's early. And so what you do is you get this learning early on. And Don, here's the powerful part of that approach. If you really grasp the desired outcomes, and then you begin to figure out which of those outcomes is underserved or overserved by the market, or what's table stakes where you just have to have it to be in the game competitively, then you start to have the vision. You're clear on what the customer's unmet needs are, but you're then starting to get to the point where you can really understand exactly what a platform solution needs to deliver. So you think about it. If you're performing whatever job it is in life sciences, you're using the best solutions you can find. They're typically not true platform solutions. So you've got to make adjustments, and you get heightened occasionally because it doesn't really work the way you'd like it to work. And somebody back there is figuring out what the desired outcomes are, that if you could do that job perfectly, bam, you've got it. Now, what that starts to say is okay, in your initial products that you'll take through your regulatory and other processes in our industry, you start to take the first steps toward give offerings that allow you to provide the customer with just enough of those desired outcomes that it's meaningful to them and makes a difference compared to what they can do today. And then you have an ability to project and say, look, we're going to add these additional desirability factors as we continue to work on the platform. And over time, we're going to give them a total solution. That's the way to think about how you apply jobs to be done. You look at their pains and their gains as a customer, and you find a way to do something that's unique and special.
It makes a lot of sense overall. And it's interesting because there is a lean term for getting out to go see the customer or go and see, and it's Genchi Gambutsu. So Genchi Gambutsu more or less means go and see. And it's kind of what you're describing here. And certainly is something that I've advocated for a lot overall. It's just this sort of idea of talking about something that's not yet physical or not something that most of us could see that is a little unfamiliar, at least from my perspective.
I have to tell you an interesting anecdote from way back. When I was about 30 years old, I was CFO of a company in the Bay Area, and Kirk Robb was on the board. Kirk at the time was the CEO of Genentech, and he had been a senior top guy at Abbott before then. And he was a sales guy by heritage. And I remember him saying how he insisted that his executive team spend time in the field talking to customers. So when I became a CEO, I made certain that I got out in the field with the reps, visiting customers, so that you could really hear them talk about, okay, this works, this doesn't work, this part of your product is great, but this one isn't so much. And oh, by the way, the competitors do this part really well. And before you know it, you're coming back and you have the inklings of what the unmet customer needs are that can begin to define a more tangible pathway forward to deliver compelling value propositions.
And where I see this tying overall is that whether you're a younger company or even an older company, that lesson overall would carry through. It's certainly these gems don't come without going out and visiting some customers and seeing them face to face as well.
I have to tell you, there was this one example where I got out there and I started to hear what they were looking, and we developed a name for it with one of the scientific colleagues, and we called it the Innovation Hub Strategy. And from there, we began to figure out, okay, if that's what the marketplace needs, because there were too many Me Too products out there, then we developed the particulars of how we would do that, and that led to the ability to go out and raise money.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about being bold in this as well. I know through our conversations as well, you and I have talked a little bit about just the fact that rather than taking a midline approach in some of these things, it would be nice to see more folks be bold. I'm sure that comes with the risk as well, that you could be bold and fail. But at the same time, I'd love to hear your comments in terms of what are you doing in terms of coaching companies and guiding companies down this pathway? And do you take a path oftentimes of telling them that they should try and take a big swing with the things that they're working on as well?
Mixed answer to that last question. So in the following way, I'm at this wonderful point in my career, as setting the stage to answering your question, where I'm able and interested and excited about giving back to helping executives not make the mistakes that I and management teams I worked with did over the years. And so there's something very satisfying about that. I think what's really important is if you take this experimentation and value inflection point mindset and really drill down on it, you may end up placing some big bets. But what you actually do is you make some very well-informed small bets that you learn from, and they guide the next small bets. And in aggregate, if you're moving rapidly enough, it will in retrospect look like some pretty serious bets. But what it really accomplishes is you recognize that you have to have an appreciation for how you don't really know the answers, and you got to get out there and push for it and constantly ask yourself. See, the value inflection point concept is a humility machine, because if you accept the idea that Rita McGrath has promoted accurately, that we live in a world of transient advantages, so there's no competitive advantage that is as sustainable as it might have been some decades ago, then you have to be swift and you have to adapt easily and rapidly. And that means you have to have this adjustable mindset and look at everything as inflection points. There was a great book back in the 90s that Andy Grove, the guy that ran Intel, wrote, and he called it Only the Paranoid Survive. And it really gets at this idea that you have to be able to anticipate that things will change, and that requires very much not the lockstep, we're all going in this direction and we're going to do that moving forward.
I'm going to take another twist. I did look a little bit at your LinkedIn page and some of the things that you've published as well. One of the things that you have out there is just a brief 4-minute sort of article on ditching the product life cycle. So how does that tie to our conversation today?
Well, I think at one point in that article, I rather sarcastically wrote, wow, the product life cycle, things go up and then they go down. Who knew? Gravity applies to the product life cycle. I think my biggest argument with it is it doesn't really inform you about anything. And so I came up with this idea of the commercial spectrum, which breaks, instead of first off, in our industry, the product life cycle, so much has to happen before T0, the product launch, that I don't think it really informs things particularly well. And then who knows what's going up, what does that cover? And then there's obviously that it declines in the future. Those are truisms. They're not informative. What the commercial spectrum that I developed speaks to is the idea that you have to identify an unmet market need. Once you've done that, it's speed to market. Then the third point of 4 is maximize the revenue trajectory, because again, sustainable competitive advantages don't last. And then accelerate positive cash flow so that you get a return on your investment. So instead of using the product life cycle, I broke it down into those 4 steps, because for me, when you talk to executives, they can understand each of those 4 concepts of the spectrum, and they can then bring clarity. And this is a huge point in go-to-market. It brings clarity to thinking so that, okay, we're in the unmet market needs section. Okay, once we've nailed that down enough, now it's all about speed to market. And then it's about maximizing the revenue and then positive cash flow. It gives you a real sense, and it can go back to that of what to do at what time. And that goes back to our original conversation about that testing that begins with technology and a marketing person.
Yeah, and recently you participated in a webinar, correct? Do you want to tell the listeners at all about what you spoke about in the webinar and what the overall general topic was?
Sure. So I was fortunate to be able to do a webinar with some of my friends at Boston Healthcare Associates, where they were talking about, in particular, market access related issues. And they asked me to talk, in addition to them, on go-to-market issues. And when we were thinking about the title for it, and this is really the core message, the subtitle was Conventional Wisdom Doesn't Work. And as I said at the beginning of the webinar, the point about what is that the answer to? It's the answer to the question, why aren't there more great companies? And that's what really got me started some years ago, thinking about this whole go-to-market issue, which is, I think go-to-market is the missing piece in the mindset, since it covers everything a company does over its life cycle. You think about, what does it, when you are raising money, what are they diligencing? The investors are diligencing your go-to-market plans and performance. Same with corporate partners, same with M&A transaction deals, same with products you have in development or on the market. So go-to-market is this pervasive concept, and therefore it connects directly to your valuations and your operating performance, which are, by the way, the 2 metrics that measure corporate success. So that was really then what I started talking about early on in the webinar. And then I concluded talking, saying, look, why doesn't it happen better? Why do companies not always do as well as they aspire to? And really what it got at was that 72% of companies their products underperform in the market. 42% of startup companies' products fail because they are not meeting an unmet need in the marketplace. Why? A lot of that is because there's really three separate challenges that have to be addressed and go to market, addressed successfully and simultaneously. And that's the product-specific ones, the organizational-specific ones, and even if you get both of those internal ones, then the marketplace can come along and swat you hard and knock you down. So that goes back to then what we were saying about the need for product market fit, organizational fit, and business model fit as the solutions to those challenges which enable future go-to-market success.
You talk about an industry like ours where all of the companies that are truly in it to help patients or create a new technology that in some way will help to save people at the end of the day, if they don't tell a good story, if they don't know their market, if they really haven't applied this understanding overall of what is the unmet need, at the end of the day, their product or their company could die. In some lucky cases, you see where a company continues on and they pivot maybe slightly, maybe to a new market, or they slightly adjust and continue on. But there are also CEOs that I've talked to in the process of conducting all of these interviews for the podcast that they said, hey, look, we hit a dead end and the company died. And in one sense, I asked one of the guests, I said, well, then what happens to all of those patients that unfortunately don't get your treatment? And in this case, I think this directly applies to the story that you're trying to tell and what you tried to do with the webinar for sure.
Yeah, most of the people I know in our industry are in it because we're excited, committed, and passionate about helping patients. But dead companies or failing companies don't help patients. So then the question becomes, how do you do things differently such that you can be a vibrant corporate success and therefore be able to be around to deliver products that have that kind of benefit for the patients we care so much about?
Absolutely. We're at the point in the show where I typically ask every guest the same three questions, and I'll start with the first one. So what inspires you, Don?
I just love this industry. I've been in the biotech industry broadly defined since 1985. I've seen it from its earliest times, or very early times. Obviously, there was a decade plus before then. It was a small industry, relatively speaking then, and it's been inspiring to watch the whole growth and evolution, and to be able to do it in first the Bay Area for close to 15 to 17 years, and then 20 plus years in the greater Boston area, where things are just so vibrant.
What concerns you?
I still think, this go-to-market stuff is really a mission element for me as well, because I look at companies and I don't see a common language about taking products and services to market. And I think it really inhibits success in these companies. And so I'm concerned, and therefore my mission is, how can I advance a common go-to-market language that really allows you to address the whole spectrum from earliest technology moments to the retirement of successful products.
Good. And what excites you?
I love this work. It's just so interesting. It's constantly learning, and every client has a different challenge. And there's no cookie cutter in go-to-market. And so you have to constantly be thinking about, okay, I've got this bag of tricks in my experience and head. Which ones apply? And maybe they don't quite apply in the way you've done them previously. And so the idea of the challenge of really thinking it through, and I'll tell you, there's a related anecdote that I put into every statement of work for every client. And it says, we've really thought hard about this project. We've defined it as clearly as we possibly can. And it's an absolutely guaranteed point that in 60 days, our understanding of this project will be different than it is today. And that's part of the inflection point angle. You get out in the marketplace, you learn, you adapt, and that's very exciting.
And it is an interesting field for sure. Not only do we have a lot going on, but we have very interesting technology and lots of new things coming continuously. Don Hawthorne, thank you so much for being a guest on the podcast. I greatly appreciate you being here and wish you all the best.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it. And last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.